They go on to say, this is pre-trib thoughts spoken through the mouth of gotquestions.org, and they are assessing the mid-trib position. So the trumpet of Revelation 11 in the model of classic mid-trib is the final in a series of trumpets. Therefore, it makes sense that it would be the last trumpet of 1 Corinthians 15. That's what the mid-tribbers say. This, again, part of this is what post-tribbers also teach. But what did the pre-tribbers think? This logic fails, however. This is what God Question says. This logic fails, however, in view of the trumpet's objectives. The trumpet that sounds at the rapture is the trumpet call of God. 1 Thessalonians 4:16. But the one in Revelation 11 is a harbinger of judgment. Harbinger. I always get that word wrong. Let's just check it. Harbinger. It's with a J sound. All right. Harbinger of judgment. It's a harbinger, not a harbinger. So it's a harbinger. So the point that GotQuestions.org is bringing up is that the logic is faulty if you're going to say that the seventh trumpet of Revelation is synonymous with the last trumpet that Paul mentions. Now, don't be confused. When we look at the classic rapture passages, like the one in 1 Corinthians 15, like the one in 1 Thessalonians 4, and we remind ourselves that these are connected to, Paul's writings are connected to what details he gleaned from Yeshua's own teachings, namely the Olivet Discourse passages, you have to remind yourself that Yeshua also mentions the trumpet in the Olivet Discourses. And so, and GotQuestions.org is going to mention this here in their little essay, but the reason I'm bringing it up to you up front is that you must then decide that if the trumpet is mentioned in passages in Paul and passages in Yeshua's own Olivet Discourses, that if you're a pre-tribber, you have to come to the conclusion that the trumpet that Jesus mentioned is not the trumpet that Paul was talking about. That there must be a trumpet at the rapture, and there must also be a trumpet at the second coming. Remember, let me go back over to this. No, let's go back over to the PowerPoint slide. According to the pre-trib rapture, the rapture takes place at the very beginning of the 7-year tribulation. So there's a trumpet at this point. The trumpet associated with 1 Corinthians 15 and the trumpet associated with 1 Thessalonians 4. This is a trumpet, according to the pre-trib view. But this trumpet is not to be equated, according to pre-tribbers, with the seventh trumpet in the book of Revelation. According to the pre-trib model, that's this trumpet over here. There's another one, the second coming. That's the seventh trumpet according to the pre-trib model. But Jesus mentions a trumpet in the Olivet Discourse. Which one of these trumpets is it according to the pre-trib view? Is it the rapture trumpet? Is this Jesus trumpet? Or is it the one over here at the very end? Well, since the pre-tribbers do not believe that the church will enter into the 70th week or into the 7-year tribulation, then they must say that the trumpet that Jesus is talking about is, let me let that fade away, is right over here, the second coming trumpet, which is synonymous with the seventh trumpet in the book of Revelation. So that's how they're going to spin those particular trumpet passages. So let me let them finish. So going back to what GotQuestions.org is saying about this seventh trumpet, this last trumpet. Remember, the word last is the way Paul describes it. Jesus doesn't use the word last in his Olivet Discourse. It's almost like he purposely leaves it open to debate. Is it a last trumpet? Is it not a last trumpet? Is it a trumpet that shows up prior to the last? Is it not part of the seventh? He doesn't say whether it's the last or the seventh. He doesn't use any one of those descriptor adjectives or anything. He just says a great trumpet. Paul calls it a last trumpet in one of his classic rapture passages. He doesn't do it in the other one. I think it's in the 1 Corinthians, he calls it the last trumpet, but in the Thessalonian passage, he doesn't. In fact, let's just pull it up real quick so that I'm not guessing. 1 Corinthians 15, I've got pulled up here. And when I scroll down to, like I said, it starts in about verse 50 here, or 53 is where, no, 1551 is where most people start and go to maybe just these two passages, two verses. 1 Corinthians 15, 51 and 52. Behold, I'm telling you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, starting in verse 52. In the twinkling of an eye, at the what? The last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable and we will be changed. So this is a classic rapture passage, but it's a rapture passage that's connected to a resurrection passage. It's, in my opinion, primarily a resurrection passage, but rapture is connected to it because Paul calls rapture the mystery that was hidden from the Old Testament, whereas resurrection was not hidden from the Old Testament writers, but rapture was. Much like the church was hidden from the Old Testament saints, well, rapture of the church would make sense. I follow that theology, that it too would be hidden from the Old Testament writers and readers. But germane to my the point I'm trying to make right now is that Paul calls this the last trumpet. But when we comparatively go over to 1 Thessalonians 4 and scroll down and start in about verse 14 and go to verse 18, so those four verses, Paul says, 1 Thessalonians 4:14, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead, so also God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep through Jesus. Verse 15, for we say this to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive. Notice, let me interject. Notice Paul is once again, just like he did in Corinthians, he is purposely conflating and connecting and overlapping and connecting the two together, resurrection with rapture. Because to Paul, these are the same event. Although one precedes the other, resurrection happens first, rapture happens immediately on the heels or on the same day, or is really part of the same event, just two stages of the same event, however you want to describe it. There's nothing in the passage that indicates that there's this time frame disconnected from rapture and a resurrection to rapture. They seem to be the same event. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead, and went back to 14, we also believe that God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. Those are the disembodied souls that are in heaven right now, the believers who are in heaven, who then come with Jesus to planet Earth to be joined up with their resurrected body. Verse 15, for we say this to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For, verse 16, the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a, what? Listen to the details. A shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with what? The trumpet of God. It doesn't say the last trumpet, nor does it say the seventh trumpet, but it just calls it the trumpet of God. Let's continue. And the dead in Christ will rise first. There's our resurrection. And then without skipping any verses, any beat, any breath, Paul keeps writing in verse 17. Then we who are alive, who remain, will be caught up together with them in the clouds. Who's the them? The them are the resurrected saints. Them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. And I might add, with the resurrected saints. So this is big family reunion of resurrected saints with living saints with the Lord. The bride and the bridegroom are meeting finally. The great resurrection. This is part of the first resurrection that's spoken of in the book of Revelation. And so we can see that Paul in both Corinthians and Thessalonians brings in trumpet language. But the reason I read the verses for you, I skipped verse 18. Therefore comfort one another with these words, end quote. The reason I brought these verses out is so that we can be sure to see that there's a trumpet in both passages. And then if we were to couple that with the Matthew, then we would see that in Matthew 31, Yeshua says, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. I'm not going to pull up the Mark and Luke versions, but just trust, well, maybe I will. They both contain trumpets as well. If I scroll down, where is it? Maybe there isn't a trumpet here. Okay, I stand corrected. I'm glad I brought it up. It doesn't show up in Mark. The trumpet doesn't show up, but I believe it does in Luke. Matthew. Well, Matthew already did. We already saw it in Matthew. But it doesn't show it in. There's no trumpet in Luke. Let me just double check. Second coming foretold. Yeah, I don't see one in but it is definitely in Matthew, which I'm fine with. This serves my purpose just to say that it's in the way I interpret the synoptics is that any detail that's found in one of them, even though it's not found in all of them, simply indicates that Yeshua did speak it and that one of the writers recorded it, but the other writers didn't record everything. But if one of the writers recorded it, then it happened. I don't think that any one of the synoptic writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, I don't think that any one of them invents details. Rather, the best way to read the synoptics and harmonize them is to put all three of them on the table as far as research data and take all of them as one event that happened in real life, and yet because we have three different witnesses, we're going to get three different versions of the same event. So as long as one of them mentioned it, it happened. It came out of Yeshua's mouth. So if Yeshua said in Matthew that there was a trumpet, then I'm fine that Mark and Luke are missing it. It just means that they didn't record it in their testimony when they gave their version of the story. So Matthew mentions it. Thank you for reminding me that. So what's my point? My point is that when we go back over to what God Questions is trying to point out, is that they believe that this trumpet in Paul's account is not the same trumpet that's mentioned in the book of Revelation, nor must it be or can it be the same trumpet that's mentioned in Yeshua. So they believe there's two different trumpets going on. All right, I'm not going to tell you what I believe yet, because I'll get to that later on. But they go on to say, this has got questions, one trumpet is a call of grace. So they're refuting, they're saying this logic fails, that this is the same trumpet. Remember, the Midtribbers say that it's the same trumpet throughout. However, Midtribbers do not say that the seventh trumpet is the same as the trumpet at the second coming. In other words, Midtribbers aren't following that Matthew 24 is speaking of that Matthew 24 is referring to the second coming at the end of the seventh week. So God Questions continues. They are refuting the idea that the seventh trumpet and the last trumpet are the same trumpet. And they say that this logic is faulty. They continue this line of reasoning by saying that one trumpet is a call of grace to God's elect, the other is a pronouncement of doom on the wicked. Further, this has got Questions perspective. The seventh trumpet in Revelation is not the last trumpet chronologically. Matthew 24:31 speaks of a later trumpet that sounds at the commencement of Christ's kingdom. In order to understand that last sentence that I just read here about the seventh trumpet in Revelation not being the last trumpet, you have to remember that pre-tribbers reject the idea, like I just showed you, that the seventh trumpet and the last trumpet are the same. They think that they also reject the idea that Matthew 24 is referring to a rapture scenario. They believe that the gathering that I just showed you in Matthew down here, and he will, verse 31, and he is Yeshua, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet blast, and they will gather together his elect. In the pre-trib dispensational interpretation of this passage, Matthew 24, the entire chapter is speaking to unsaved Israel who will enter into the 70th week of Daniel. And therefore, verse 31 is not speaking to a church that's being gathered by Jesus at the beginning of the 70th week or even in the middle of the 70th week. Rather, verse 31 is a gathering of Israel at the very end of the 70th week at the second coming of Christ with another trumpet. So there's Jesus coming back again from heaven with a trumpet being sounded again, and some people that are special to Christ being joined together with Christ again. So that's why, you remember we went through this long exercise of trying to explain whether there's one second coming or two in the pre-trib model. How many second comings of Christ are there? You know, at face value, they're going to say there's only one second coming. It's because in their model, the rapture and the second coming are completely two separate events, separated by 7 years, separated by two different trumpets, separated by two gatherings. I'm using the word gathering in quotes with my fingers for those of you who can't see me. Separated by two special groups of people, one called the church, one called the elect, joining themselves to Christ. So again, in their model, at the rapture over here, there is a trumpet. At the second coming over here, there's a trumpet. At the rapture over here, there's a gathering, again, quote unquote, a gathering of special people. At the second coming over here, there's a gathering of special people. At the rapture over here, there's a trumpet. And at the second coming over here, there's another trumpet. So it's no wonder that those of us who are not pre-tribbers say that you guys got a second coming and a third coming. And yet, ask them, corner them, question them. Pre-tribbers will tell you, nope, there's not two second comings. There's only one second coming. It's at the very end. Okay. All right, let's keep going with Got Questions assessment. I envision getting through this in one reading, and we're just about there. We're just about done. This isn't long. Let's keep going. Again, we're looking at a pre-tribber who wrote this essay, who is part of the group called GotQuestions.org. He's a staffer. I don't know who wrote this. They don't give a name other than just pre-trib, or other than just God Questions. But they are analyzing and assessing the mid-tribulational view, and they are providing what they call strengths and weaknesses. All right, let's keep going. From their perspective, pre-trib, looking at the mid-trib, they say 1 Thessalonians 5:9 says that the church has not been appointed to suffer wrath, but to receive salvation. This would seem to indicate that believers will not experience the tribulation. However, Midtribulationism interprets wrath as only referring to the second half of the tribulation. Remember, the Midtrib view, which is here, has the entire 70th week of Daniel. All of this is the 70th week, so that's a full 7 years, but it's cut right down the middle. And in that cutting down, that's when we got our rapture, right there at the midpoint, which means from their perspective, we got tribulation on the front 3.5 years, compared to great tribulation on the back 3.5 years, which is equated with God's wrath. And therefore, since all of this is God's wrath, then the rapture must have to take place right there before. So in order to hold to the theology that's taught in the Bible that God will not pour out wrath on his bride or on the church, right? This is a theology that 3 of the 4 models hold to. Only the post-tribbers, the classic ones, allow for the bride of Christ to enter into God's wrath, albeit to be protected. So in concept, all 4 models hold to this idea that God isn't going to punish his bride, the church, in a wrathful way. Rather, 3 of the models have the church removed before the wrath is poured out, and one of the models, the post-tribbers, have God supernaturally protecting his bride, but not removing her before pouring out his wrath. He just waterproofs her. He puts a protective bubble around her, protective custody, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so going back to the essay. So, GotQuestions.org, which again is synonymous with the pre-trib position, when they look at the mid-trib theology, they're going to have to admit that there's some agreement with their theology that says that God is not going to pour out wrath on his bride. But they go on to say that limiting the word, when we're talking about wrath, limiting the word in such a way seems unwarranted, however. Surely the terrible judgments contained in the seals and judgments, including famine, poisoned rivers, a darkened moon, bloodshed, earthquakes, and torment, could also be considered the wrath of God. That's according to GotQuestions.org. Later on, we're going to find out that I disagree with them there, but I don't want to share my position just yet. We're going to get to it next week. I want to get through all of this one this week. We still got 12 minutes left in study in the hour long, and I'm definitely going to finish this one this week. Continuing with GotQuestions.org, they are showing you what they believe are the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-trib rapture. Mid-tribulationism places the rapture in Revelation 11 prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. There are 2 problems with this placement in the chronology of Revelation. This is what Got Questions thinks is a problem with the mid-trib view. This is not Ariel Hanavi's PREWRATH interpretation of the Midtrib view. So don't get confused as to who's talking here. This is not my essay. So there are two problems with this placement in the chronology of Revelation. First, the only occurrence of the term Great Tribulation in the entire book of Revelation is in 7:14 before the opening of the seventh seal. Second, the only reference to a great day of wrath is in Revelation 6:17 during the events of the sixth seal. Both of these references come too early for a mid-tribulational rapture, which is timed according to the seventh trumpet. Part of what I'll tip my hand just slightly, just so you can get a little bit of teaser of what I believe. Part of what GodQuestions.org is saying, I believe, lines up with what I would say about the sequencing here, but part of it misses the mark. Remember, as a PREWRATHer, I try to harmonize what I believe are the strengths of all four positions into one cohesive view, one biblical view. At the same time, I try to reject all of the weaker parts of Scripture, and I believe that PREWRATH does a great job of doing just that. And eventually we'll get to a commentary put out by Charles Cooper that does just what I'm describing. He takes all the good stuff and keeps it, and takes all the bad stuff and tosses it out. And when at the end of the day, when you look at what you've got, it conveniently fits into the model known as PREWRATH. But we'll get to that in time. And then as we're drawing to a close, and if we finish a little early, that's fine by me. This is GotQuestions.org speaking on the mid-trib view. They say a final weakness of the mid-tribulational view is shared by the other two theories. Namely, the Bible does not give an explicit timeline concerning future events. Scripture does not expressly teach one view over another, and that's why we have diversity of opinion concerning the end times and some variety on how the related prophecies should be harmonized. And that's going to do it for their perspective. So we'll scroll back up to the top. So what we looked at is the question that's put forth by GotQuestions.org. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-tribulational view of the rapture? And what we came away with is that GotQuestions.org is a pre-trib leaning organization. And therefore, from their perspective as pre-trib, they're going to disagree with the mid-trib view, and they're going to say why they believe it has X amount of strength and weaknesses. And in order to follow along with their essay, the one we just got through reading, it's helpful to know that by and large, the pre-trib model of which GotQuestions agrees with, they hold to, the pre-trib model by and large operates under a dispensational framework. Maybe I can show you dispensationalism if I got one of my time frames here. I'll just flash this on the screen for you. Maybe I can full screen it there for you as well. So dispensationalism, what does dispensationalism teach? You guys have seen this before. At least I hope you've seen it. Dispensationalism has this giant swath path of history of that we read in the Bible, but primarily picking up the story where the church age is born. So thus over on the far left of the screen, we've got Christ and the age of grace. The church age is sort of introduced to the readers of the Bible, starting with Acts chapter 2. And then what happens is we've got the rapture that takes place here, which kicks off the 7-year tribulation. So notice in the dispensational view, the rapture spells the end of the church age and the restarting of the age that the church age, the restarting of the age of Israel, something like that. It doesn't say it here on this chart, but that's the way you're supposed to read the chart, is that the church age comes to an end at the rapture, and the 7 years of tribulation are not to be equated with any type of church age. But then we've got the second coming of Christ, the bodily second coming, where he returns to planet Earth with his saints, not for his saints, but with his saints. And in so doing, then the millennial kingdom is ushered in. That's why, on the one hand, dispensationalism is premillennial, and on the other hand, it sharply distinguishes between the church and Israel. And so we've got the nations revolting at the very end of the millennium, and then the final judgment, and then the eternal state. So the dispensational perspective, the main point that I wanted you to walk away with is that the rapture here is that thing that separates the 7-year tribulation from the church age where God deals with the Gentiles. That's primary why pre-tribbers hold to the theologies that they do. So when we go back over to gotquestions.org, we can now begin to understand why they reject some of the sequencing of the mid-trib view like they do. The pre-tribbers just absolutely cannot put the church into the 7th week of Daniel, into the 7-year tribulation. They just can't. In order to do that, they have to go against dispensationalism. And that dispensational rock is like a pillar in their theology. It's like a 3-pillared house. If they pull one pillar out, or three-legged chair, if they pull one leg away, the chair will fall. And so they are absolutely not going to take out that dispensational peg, that leg, that pillar from their theology. So it makes sense that they are going to kick against the mid-trib view in that way. But in closing, I just wanted to show you the mid-trib view one more time, just so you understand that this is the view that we just interacted with. In the mid-trib rapture, there's a 7-year time frame known as the 7-year tribulation. It still includes tribulation. However, they take the view that sharply that it's divided into 3.5 years and 3.5 years. The Antichrist signs the covenant at the beginning of the first 3.5 years, only to break the covenant at the midpoint of the 7 years. At that midpoint, according to the mid-tribulation rapture, at this midpoint, that's when we have our rapture, right there at the midpoint. And that is when God's wrath is poured out afterwards, right? All of that, which is synonymous with the Great Tribulation. So God's wrath and the Great Tribulation are the same thing. However, Christ will come again at the very end of the 7th week to return with his bride and do battle with the Antichrist, the Battle of Armageddon. And I guess that's at the time when Israel will be saved or something like that. Neither the pre-trib nor the mid-trib kind of talk a lot about how Israel is in there somewhere. But one notable part about the mid-trib is that they allow the church to go into the 7th week of Daniel to face some tribulation, although not the Great Tribulation itself. So the mid-trib has features of the pre-trib. The mid-trib has features of the post-trib. The mid-trib has features of the PREWRATH. So that's why it's kind of attractive to some, because it tries to pull away from some of the weaknesses of a pre-trib. It definitely starts to pull away from dispensationalism, but it doesn't go as far as embracing everything that the PREWRATH teaches. Again, a lot of let me go backwards. No, a lot of Bible students often get mid-trib rapture confused with PREWRATH rapture. So here's PREWRATH and here's mid-trib, and they think, wow, both of you guys have a rapture sometime after the midpoint, although ours is right there. But you guys have a shortened God's wrath time period, right? Wow, my circles are horrible. Let's just fill it in. My point being is that for this reason, a lot of pre-tribbers, I've heard pastors just say this. They're like, mid-trib, PREWRATH, you guys are the same thing. So on the pre-trib and the pre-trib radar, sometimes all they can see is the post-tribbers. So the arch nemesis that do battle with each other are these two guys, the pre-trib rapture and the post-trib rapture. These are the ones that most of your YouTube traffic, you're going to find videos and commentaries that are just doing battle pre-trib versus post-trib. And many pre-tribbers don't even give the pre-wrathers a serious consideration. They just lump the pre-wrathers and mid-tribbers all together and go, both of those are just out to lunch, because neither one of these views, neither the pre-trib nor the pre-wrath, neither one of us gives dispensationalism a serious consideration. And so that's one reason why the pre-tribbers just dismiss us out of hand. So that's what we're dealing with. We covered that. I think we used up all of the hour. It's time to call the study, bring the study to a close. Next week, what I'll have for you is something that similar to what I did last time. I'll have a commentary that I created. It's a little longer than this, obviously. It is going to take this material that you're looking at right now in front of you. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Midtrib view of the rapture? It's going to take it, and I, a pre-wrather, am going to address everything that got questions brought up. I condensed it. I didn't just copy and paste their entire essay. I shortened their answers. But I'm going to take their answers, and then I, a pre-wrather, I'm going to respond to them point by point. I think there were only 7 if I remember when I wrote it. But that'll be next week. But that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end time events.